Hello. Today we're here to talk about DFIR. Let's start with the basics. Rich, what is DFIR?
So DFIR is Digital Forensics Incident Response. So it's essentially when an organisation is going through an incident, you're looking to understand what's happening. So the digital forensic aspect of that is to identify, preserve, collect and analyse and report on digital evidence that might be on computers, servers and mobile phones. Cloud sources as well might have logs that you need to access. And the incident response side of it as well is being very aware of what's happening to the organisation. So you want to be able to collect all that evidence and analyse it, but you also want the impact to be as low as possible. So you've got to take into account things like if you're locking machines out, how long is that done for, what's the business impact, and trying to continue with understanding what happens so you can put things in place to stop it from happening again, but also try and get the business back up and running and reduce that impact to them.
So what are the main types of attacks that you're responding to during DFIR?
So we see a lot of ransomware, a lot of business email compromise, some data theft as well, website defacement and those sort of things.
So during these attacks, what are the threat actors trying to achieve?
A lot of it is financially motivated, especially when we're talking about ransomware. The threat actors are essentially trying to gain access to an organisation. They then want to understand where their main data repositories are. They'll try and steal data or exfiltrate data from the network, and then finally deploying ransom, which locks users out of the files. And business email compromise as well, it's quite heavily financially motivated. So what we often see in these kind of incidents is threat actors will gain access to a mailbox. They'll try and identify an opportunity to intercept a payment redirection fraud is what it's called, and essentially impersonate someone and get funds transferred to an account that they're in control of. And for data theft, generally that's more of your sort of stealthy. They're not really trying to announce that they're there by deploying ransomware, trying to exfiltrate data from an organisation's network without being discovered.
So let's talk about ransomware a bit more. Who are the major players conducting these attacks?
So a lot of the activity is being attributed to Russian threat actors. Probably some of the biggest names that are known out there for ransomware is groups like Lockbit, Conti when they were operational, Hive ransomware, which has been in the news quite recently as well with the FBI successfully seizing their servers. So a lot of the activity does end up being attributed back to Russian-based infrastructure.
And once the threat actors perform an attack, how long does it actually take them to achieve their goals here?
It can depend. So we've seen some instances where the threat actor is able to gain access to an environment. They escalate their privileges, so essentially become a domain admin, can access everything, exfiltrate gigabytes of data, and then finally ransom network. And they did all that within 14 hours. So that was quite a quick sort of end-to-end attack. And then some of the other ones we've seen threat actors in the environment for a couple of weeks up to months, sort of just understanding what's in the network and where the sort of valuable information is held.
So some threat actors might be more competent than others, perhaps. Once they steal this information or deploy ransomware, how do they actually make money out of these attacks?
So a lot of the time, essentially, depending on the group and if they maintain a leak site and things like that on the dark web, the primary way of making money is by encrypting the files, making them inaccessible to the end user. So if the organisation that were the victim of the attack can't, they don't have backups or anything like that, they can't actually get back their files, they're sort of in a position where the only way that they'll be able to is by paying a ransom. And then some ransomware operators also do something called double extortion, where prior to actually ransoming files and encrypting them, they will exfiltrate data, so steal data from the organisation's network, and then they'll also threaten to post that on their dark web leak site. So essentially, the organisation has to now consider getting their data back, as well as whether they want their information to be made publicly available on the dark web.
And I guess the organisation doesn't want their commercially sensitive or potentially personally identifiable information out on the dark web could cause huge reputational damage and have further financial impacts.
Absolutely.
So ransomware sounds quite prevalent, but I understand that business email compromise attacks are also quite popular. What is a business email compromise attack?
Yeah, they are definitely very popular. And a business email compromise is essentially where a threat actor gains unauthorized access to a mailbox belonging to an organization. It could be one user, it could be multiple users. And essentially once they're in there, they can go through and view emails, understand what sort of access or other organizations this particular user communicates with.
So what's the goal of these attacks? How does the threat actor use this access to gain something?
A lot of the time it's financially motivated, and their main objective is to perform a payment redirection fraud. So if we've got a user that's had their mailbox compromised and they're responsible for paying another organization, the threat actor might provide a false invoice with bank account details that they're in control of, and with the aim that that will get paid into their accounts.
Okay, so how does the threat actor gain access to these accounts in the first place?
A lot of the time it's through phishing. So they will send an email to that particular victim user, which will then contain a link to a credential harvesting website where they'll enter their username and password. To some extent, there's also some sort of credential stuffing, trying to sort of brute force way into accounts and things like that. And in some cases as well, once they've gained access to the username and password, there's some MFA bypass techniques where they're able to essentially get in without having to satisfy that MFA.
So how can organizations protect themselves against these kind of attacks?
Probably one of the biggest protections that they can put in place is multi-factor authentication across all external services that they have. So by doing that, they are requiring the end user to have not only a username and password, but another factor to prove it's them. So that could be an authenticator app that's on their phone, or it could be a hardware authenticator key or something like that.
That makes sense. And what role does patching play in these protections?
Very important. So a lot of the investigations that we do see threat actors exploiting vulnerabilities in software. So making sure that organizations are not only aware of what's outdated and needs to be patched, but also patching it swiftly when something does happen is very important.
And it sounds like the human element is pretty important, as it can be quite a significant vulnerability. How can we address that?
I think the security awareness is very important. So making employees aware of what the potential attack vectors are, how to spot them, and how to report them.
And are there any other products or technologies you might recommend that could help?
Endpoint visibility is a big one. So they can organizations can have endpoint detection response, or EDR tools, that's monitoring what's happening on systems, and also having everything logged into a central monitoring system. So a SIEM, or a security information and event monitoring management system. And essentially that can correlate everything and alert on it. And importantly, having someone actually monitoring those tools. So if an alert does fire for something malicious at 3 o'clock in the morning, someone can investigate that and understand what's happening.
Okay, great. This has been the basics of DFIR with Trisco Labs. If you need any more information on any of these topics, please feel free to reach out at any time. Thanks, Richard.
No worries.